I still remember the moment I realized something was wrong with my own house. I came back to Columbus 3 days earlier than planned, expecting silence, maybe a little dust, maybe the smell of old coffee I forgot to clean up. Instead, there was a black Ford Explorer parked in my driveway and a white Honda Accord I had never seen before. My key still worked. That's the funny part. The lock didn't stop me, but the feeling inside the house did. And here's the question I still can't shake. How do people start living inside your home like you're already gone? Stay with me. This gets worse before it makes sense. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop your country and local time in the comments. And if you like real-life family stories like this, hit subscribe. I've got more you won't see coming. Let me take you back to the morning I left Columbus. My name is Jensen Cox, 68 years old, retired, widower, and according to my son Daniel, I'm the kind of man who still checks locks twice even when the house is on fire. I take that as a compliment. I used to work as a FEMA fraud investigator, not the glamorous kind of government job people see in movies, more like the kind where you show up after disasters and figure out who is rebuilding their house and who is rebuilding a lie. I spent 31 years learning how people bend rules when they think nobody is watching. That job never really left me. My house sits in a quiet suburb just outside Columbus, Ohio, Maplewood Drive. If you ever drove through it, you'd probably miss it on purpose. Two-story brick house, slightly faded red shingles, a driveway that cracks a little more every winter, like it's trying to tell me something. After my wife passed, it was just me and memories. And then Daniel came by more often. Daniel Cox is my only son, 39 years old. Works logistics for a shipping company out near Groveport. Good kid, hard worker. Not always the best at reading people, but he tries. That matters. Then there's Hannah. Hannah Whitmore, now Hannah Cox. The first time Daniel brought her home, she smiled too quickly. You know that kind of smile. The one that arrives before the eyes decide whether they're happy or not. I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. I learned a long time ago that fathers who talk too early often stop being invited to dinner. She was organized. I'll give her that. Always carrying a planner. Always asking questions about structure plans and future stability. At first I thought she was just responsible. Then I started noticing the details. Like the way she asked me once, very casually, Jensen, "Do you keep your property deed in a safe or a filing cabinet?" I remember laughing. "Honey, I keep it in the same place I keep my will. Somewhere I forget until I need it." She didn't laugh. That should have told me something, but it didn't. Now, don't get me wrong, life in that house wasn't tense all the time. There were normal moments, too. Sunday dinners when Daniel would come over, bring cheap beer, and try to fix my garage door opener like he was born with a toolbox in his hands. Hannah would sit at the table scrolling on her phone, occasionally looking up to ask questions that sounded harmless, but never really were. How much do you pay in property tax again? Do you ever think about downsizing? Have you updated your home insurance recently? I remember one time I said, half joking, "Are you planning to buy me out or move in?" She laughed. Too fast. Just thinking ahead. That phrase stuck with me longer than it should have. Still, I didn't expect anything bad. Not really, because people don't expect betrayal from family. That's not how we're wired. We expect strangers to cheat us, not dinner guests. And then came the trip. I had planned a short visit to Chicago. Nothing dramatic. Just meeting my old friend Tom Reynolds. We worked together at FEMA for almost a decade. Tom retired before me and somehow turned into the kind of man who always knows which diner has the best pie within a 50-mile radius. Before I left, Hannah was unusually helpful. She offered to keep an eye on the house. Her exact words. "I mean, it'll be empty anyway, right? I can stay over sometimes, make sure everything's fine." Daniel thought it was thoughtful. I thought it was unnecessary. But I said yes anyway, because sometimes you let people show you who they are, even when a small part of you already suspects it. The morning I left Columbus was gray. The kind of gray sky that doesn't rain but still makes you feel like it could change its mind any second. I stood in my kitchen holding a mug of black coffee watching Daniel load my suitcase into my old Ford Escape. Hannah stood by the door tapping her phone. "Everything okay at the house while I'm gone?" I asked. "Oh, totally," she said without looking up. "We'll take care of everything." That word again. I remember nodding like it meant nothing. But here's the thing about me. I don't miss details. I ignore them. There's a difference. Tom always says I have a selective attention problem. I call it survival. The airport ride was quiet. Daniel tried to talk about work. I listened, but part of me was still thinking about Hannah's questions. Not because they were strange individually, but because together they formed a pattern I didn't like. Patterns are what I used to get paid for. In Chicago, Tom picked me up from O'Hare in a silver Chevy Silverado that smelled like old leather and peppermint gum. He hadn't changed much. Still wears the same style of jacket, like he's afraid fashion might file a complaint against him. "You look older," he said immediately. "You look the same," I replied. "That's because I stopped caring 10 years ago." We laughed. That easy kind of laughter you only get with people who knew you before life started collecting receipts. We ate deep dish pizza at a place near Wicker Park, Lou Malnati's. The kind of meal that makes you question your life choices and cholesterol levels at the same time. At one point, Tom looked at me and said, "So how's retirement treating you? Still fixing things that aren't broken?" I shrugged, still finding things that pretend they're not broken. He smirked. "That sounds like a FEMA answer." I should have laughed more at that, but I didn't. Because halfway through that trip, something shifted in my head. It started small. A memory of Hannah asking about my deed, then another her asking about insurance, then the way she said "we" instead of "I." And suddenly I wasn't on vacation anymore. I was thinking like an investigator again. That night in Tom's guest room, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan made a slow clicking sound like it was counting something I couldn't see. I stared at my phone. Daniel hadn't called. Hannah hadn't texted. That was unusual. Not alarming on its own, but unusual enough. At 2:13 a.m., I sat up and made a decision that I couldn't fully explain even to myself at the time. "I'm going back early," I whispered to nobody. Tom was going to call me dramatic in the morning. He always does. But I've learned something over the years. When your gut starts talking in a calm voice, you don't negotiate with it. You listen. And that's exactly what I did. I changed my flight. 3 days early, and I didn't tell anyone. Not Daniel, not Hannah, not even Tom, until the next morning when he found me packing and said, "You're either in trouble or you're about to cause it." I told him I wasn't sure yet, but I was about to find out. And that's when I started noticing something even worse. Not what they did while I was gone, but what they had already started before I ever left. I want you to understand something before I go further. There's a specific kind of silence that happens when you decide to come home early from a trip. It's not peaceful. It's not relaxing. It's the kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for you to confirm something you already suspect. My flight from Chicago to Columbus left at 9:10 a.m. United Airlines, Gate C-17. I remember the exact seat number, 214A window seat, which I didn't even bother looking out of. Tom dropped me off at O'Hare and shook my hand a little longer than usual. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," I said. "That's why I'm going." He gave me that look. You know that look. Half concern, half respect, and half this man is about to cause paperwork for someone. "Call me if you need backup," he said. "I spent 30 years avoiding backup," I told him. "I'm not starting now." He laughed, but it didn't fully land. The flight itself felt shorter than it should have. Or maybe my mind just skipped parts of it. I kept thinking about Hannah Whitmore Cox, about her voice when she said "we'll take care of everything," about how smoothly she inserted herself into responsibilities that were never hers. And I kept thinking about my house, not as a home, as a system That's how my brain works. That's how FEMA trained me. Houses aren't just buildings, they're patterns of ownership, behavior, access, and control. When something changes in that pattern, it doesn't happen randomly. It happens intentionally. By the time we landed at John Glenn Columbus International Airport, I wasn't tired anymore. I was focused. The kind of focused you don't get from coffee. The kind you get from experience telling you to pay attention. I picked up my luggage myself. No rush, no announcements to anyone, just Jensen Cox walking out of Terminal B like a man who had nothing unusual planned. The Uber driver was a guy named Malik, early 30s, quiet, smelled faintly like pine air freshener and fast food fries. "Maplewood Drive," he asked. "Yeah," I said, "and take your time." He laughed. "Nobody ever says that. Today I mean it." The drive from the airport to my neighborhood is usually about 25 minutes. That day it felt longer, not because of traffic, but because of everything I was noticing. The grocery store near Livingston Avenue had a new sign. A construction crew was repainting a strip mall I didn't care about before, but suddenly noticed now. Even the trees looked like they had been slightly rearranged while I was gone. Ridiculous thought. But that's what suspicion does. It turns everything into evidence even when it's not. Then we turned onto Maplewood Drive, and that's when I saw it. A black Ford Explorer parked in my driveway, and behind it, a white Honda Accord. 2 cars, not mine. I didn't say anything immediately. Malik glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay back there?" "Yeah," I said calmly. "Just unexpected visitors." He nodded like that explained everything. But nothing about that moment was normal. Because my house had always been simple. My Ford Escape should have been in the driveway. Maybe Daniel's truck if he was visiting. That was it. Not strangers. Not multiple vehicles. I paid Malik, gave him a tip without thinking, and stepped out. The air outside felt different. Same temperature, same Ohio humidity, but heavier, like the atmosphere was holding its breath with me. I stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds longer than I should have. This is the part I need you to understand. I was not scared. Not yet. I was observing. That's what experience does to you. It delays emotion until information is confirmed. I walked up the driveway slowly. The Ford Explorer was newer than anything Daniel owned. Clean. Black paint polished enough to reflect the sky. The Honda Accord was older, slightly dented near the rear bumper. 2 different owners, 2 different stories. Neither of them mine. My key was already in my hand when I reached the front door. And here's something strange, I hesitated before using it. Not because I thought it wouldn't work, but because I already knew it would. Click. The lock opened like it always had. That should have reassured me. It didn't. I opened the door, and I need you to stay with me here. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not bad, not good, just different. Like someone had tried to make my house smell like theirs instead of letting it smell like itself. There was a faint citrus cleaner scent that didn't belong anywhere near my kitchen. I stepped inside. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. But I heard movement upstairs. Light footsteps, not Daniel's. I know how my son walks. Heavy, slightly rushed, like he's always late for something he forgot he agreed to. These footsteps were different, controlled, intentional. I closed the door behind me slowly, and then I saw it. The living room furniture had been rearranged. My couch, the old brown leather one I had for 12 years, was pushed closer to the window. A new throw blanket sat on it. Beige, not mine. The coffee table had been replaced, glass instead of wood. And on that glass table, a set of unfamiliar car keys. That was the moment my brain shifted gears, not panic, classification, evidence. I took a slow breath. "You don't panic in your own house," I muttered to myself. "That's rule number 1. From upstairs, a voice called out. "Female. Hannah. Is that you?" Silence. Then footsteps coming down. I stepped slightly to the side out of direct view of the staircase, and that's when I saw her, Hannah Whitmore Cox. And behind her, two more people I didn't expect to see in my house at all. Her parents, Richard Whitmore and Linda Whitmore, standing comfortably like they had always belonged there, like I was the visitor. Richard looked at me first, slight confusion, then mild irritation, like I had interrupted a conversation I wasn't invited to. Hannah's face changed faster, not fear, recognition of a problem that had arrived earlier than planned. And in that exact moment, I finally understood something very important. This wasn't just a visit. This was occupancy. And they had been waiting for me to stay gone longer. But I didn't. I came home early, 3 days early. And whatever plan they had just hit a timeline error they didn't prepare for. I smiled slightly, not because I was happy, because I finally had all the information I needed. And I said the first calm words of the storm. This is new. There's a moment in every investigation I ever worked where the situation stops being confusing and starts being structured. You can feel it, like the air suddenly stops guessing and starts revealing patterns. Standing in my own living room watching Hannah Whitmore Cox freeze for half a second before she forced a smile back onto her face. That was the moment things shifted, not for them, for me. Richard Whitmore was the first to speak. He stepped forward like he owned the space, which already told me a lot about him. "Oh," he said, blinking slowly. "You're Jensen, right? We weren't expecting you until later this week." Later this week. Interesting choice of words. Not we didn't know you were coming back early, but we expected you later. That implies planning. I kept my voice calm. Plans changed. Linda Whitmore gave a polite little laugh the kind people use when they want tension to pretend it doesn't exist. "Well, that's life, isn't it?" I nodded. "It is." Hannah finally stepped down the last step of the staircase. She was wearing one of my old house keys on a blue lanyard. That detail hit me quietly, not emotionally, professionally, because I never gave her that key. I only ever gave Daniel one spare, so either Daniel gave it to her or there was another copy made. Both answers were interesting. Neither was good. "You're home early," Hannah said, her tone carefully balanced between surprise and control. 3 days early, I corrected gently. Flight got changed. She smiled too quickly again. "Oh, wow, that's inconvenient timing." Inconvenient timing. That phrase stayed with me. Because to me, timing is never inconvenience. It's either coincidence or interference. And I don't believe in coincidence. I walked slowly toward the coffee table. The unfamiliar keys were still there. I picked them up without asking. Car keys, Ford Explorer, rental agreement tag attached. I turned it slightly in my fingers. "Nice vehicle," I said casually. "Who's renting the Explorer?" Richard cleared his throat. "That would be ours." "Yours," I repeated. "Yes," he said. "We're just staying temporarily." Hannah thought it would be easier to consolidate things while you were away. Consolidate things. Another interesting phrase. I've heard it before in fraud cases. It usually shows up right before someone tries to reclassify ownership as convenience. I nodded slowly. Consolidate my house. Hannah stepped in quickly. "Not your house, Jensen, just sharing space. You weren't here. It didn't make sense for such a big place to sit empty." There it was, the logic trap. People always justify wrongdoing by starting with something reasonable. Empty house, wasted space, temporary arrangement. Then they slide the rest of the argument in, like it belongs there. I leaned back slightly, hands behind me. Calm posture, observational mode. "And Daniel," I asked. Hannah hesitated half a second too long. "He's been busy with work," not answering the question. That was also an answer. I looked around the room again. More details now surfaced clearly. A new rug I didn't buy. family photos rearranged, my old lamp replaced with something modern and expensive looking, and on the wall near the kitchen entrance, a printed document in a plastic sleeve. I walked toward it. No one stopped me. That alone told me something. The document read, Temporary Occupancy Agreement, Cox Residence signed. My name was not signed, but Daniel's was. My jaw tightened slightly, not anger, calculation. Hannah followed my gaze. It's just for organization purposes. Daniel agreed. Daniel agreed to what exactly I asked quietly. Richard stepped forward again. Look, Mr. Cox, we're not trying to take anything. We're just helping stabilize things while Hannah and Daniel get settled financially. Financially. There it was. The real motive hiding behind polite language. I turned to him, and you thought stability required moving into my house? Linda smiled tightly. It's a large home sitting empty half the time. I almost laughed, half the time, as if ownership is measured in occupancy hours. But I didn't laugh, because I noticed something more important. They believed what they were saying. That's the dangerous part. Not criminals who know they're wrong, but people who convince themselves they're right. I walked slowly into the kitchen. Everything had been reorganized. My cabinets labeled, my fridge filled with groceries I didn't buy, a second set of mugs, and a family calendar on the wall with their names on it, not mine. That's when I finally felt it, not anger, violation. There's a difference. Anger is loud. Violation is quiet. And quiet things are what I'm good at dealing with. I turned back toward them. Hannah was watching me carefully now, like she was trying to predict whether I would explode or comply. She didn't know me well enough. I don't explode, I document. Tell me something, I said softly. Who exactly advised you that you could establish residency here? Richard frowned. We didn't need advice. Daniel said I raised a hand. Careful. Silence. I continued. Because if Daniel said anything about legal authority, I'd like to hear it from him directly. Hannah's expression shifted, just slightly. That was mistake number one. Emotion leakage. I stepped back into the living room and sat down on my own couch. Slowly, intentionally, like I was reclaiming a position in a chess game. They all watched me, waiting. I looked at Hannah. You've been here how long, I asked. 3 days, she said. Of course. 3 days. The same amount of time I came back early. Coincidence again, number patterns, always patterns. I nodded. And during those 3 days, you've changed furniture, printed documents, and assigned yourself access to my property. Richard interrupted, slightly defensive now. We didn't do anything illegal. I looked at him directly. Calm voice. That depends on documentation. Linda shifted uncomfortably. Hannah crossed her arms. Are you threatening us? I smiled slightly again. No, I said. I'm observing. And then I leaned forward just a little. I used to investigate FEMA fraud cases for a living. People always think fraud is dramatic. It's not. It's paperwork, timing, assumptions, and one small mistake where someone thinks nobody is looking. The room got quieter. Not because I raised my voice, because I didn't. I stood up again and walked toward the hallway. I'm going to check something, I said casually. Hannah stepped forward quickly, check what I paused, then looked back at her, the basement, and for the first time since I walked in, her confidence slipped, just for a second. But that was enough, because I had seen that expression before, right before people realized the house they thought they were reorganizing was actually being watched the entire time. I've learned over the years that basements tell the truth faster than living rooms. Living rooms are for performance. Basements are for storage. And storage always keeps the receipts people think they've thrown away. So when I said I'm going to check the basement, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't wait for permission. I just walked. Behind me, I heard Hannah's chair scrape slightly against the floor. That tiny sound told me everything I needed to know. She didn't expect that sentence. Richard followed immediately. There's nothing down there you need to see. That was mistake number 2. Telling an investigator what he doesn't need to see is like telling a firefighter which rooms are probably fine. I stopped at the hallway entrance and looked back at them. Then you won't mind if I confirm that, I said calmly. Linda gave a nervous laugh. It's just storage. Old boxes. Nothing interesting. Perfect, I replied. I love old boxes. I turned the basement light on. The bulb flickered twice before stabilizing. That's another thing I've noticed in life. People who take over spaces never replace the small things. Light bulbs, door hinges, air filters. They focus on visible control, not structural maintenance, which is why they always leave evidence behind. The stairs creaked as I went down, one step, then another. The air got cooler, heavier, like the house was exhaling something it had been holding in. Halfway down, I already saw the first inconsistency. A shoe rack, not mine. New, plastic, cheap. Then a folded stroller near the wall. I paused. A stroller. That was not part of any temporary arrangement. I kept walking. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement opened up into a space I recognized, but also didn't. My old workbench was still there, but pushed to the side. In the center of the room stood two folding tables. On them, documents, folders, a laptop, and what looked like printed copies of utility bills. And sitting on top of everything, a small stack of envelopes addressed to Whitmore family, residence confirmation mail. I exhaled slowly. So that's what this was. Not just staying in the house. They were building residency infrastructure. That's the only way I can describe it. A system designed to create the appearance of legitimacy over time. Hannah appeared at the bottom of the stairs behind me. You shouldn't be down here, she said quickly. I didn't turn around yet. I live here, I replied. Down here is part of it. She hesitated. It's just temporary organization. We were trying to help Daniel keep things structured. I turned slightly. Structured for what outcome, I asked. Silence. That's when Richard came down, too slower now, less confident. I think you're misunderstanding everything he said. I nodded. That's possible. Then I picked up one of the folders. Inside, scanned copies of utility bills, electricity, water, gas. All recently switched, all in process of being redirected. Not fully completed, but started, and I knew immediately what I was looking at. Change of responsibility filings, I said quietly. Hannah stepped forward. They're just updates. I raised a hand again. No, I said, they're not updates, they're attempts. I turned a page. There it was. A printed occupancy statement with my address listed under secondary resident verification pending. My name was not signed. But Daniel's email was used. I closed the folder gently. Where is Daniel? I asked. Hannah looked away for half a second too long. Richard answered instead. He said it was fine. I looked at him. No, I said calmly. He didn't. That word landed harder than I expected, because I knew Daniel. He was many things. Confident wasn't one of them when it came to paperwork like this. I walked slowly around the basement tables. You've been preparing this, I said, at least a week, maybe more. Hannah crossed her arms. We were trying to help the family situation. You have all this space and Daniel is struggling financially right now. There it is. I interrupted softly. She stopped. I nodded once. The justification. Richard frowned. Excuse me. You always start with sympathy, I said. Then you moved to logic. Then paperwork. Then occupation. I tapped the folder. You skipped steps 2 and 3 and went straight to paperwork. Silence. The basement felt smaller now. Not physically, socially. That's what happens when truth enters a space that was built on assumption. I pulled out my phone. Hannah reacted immediately. What are you doing documenting? I said. Richard stepped forward. You don't need to escalate this. I looked at him. I'm not escalating anything. I replied. I'm correcting it. I took photos of the documents. Each click of the camera felt louder than it should have. Hannah's voice sharpened. You're making this into something it's not. I lowered the phone. That's where you're wrong, I said calmly. You already made it into something. I'm just labeling it correctly. I started walking back upstairs. That's when Richard said something he shouldn't have. Look, Jensen, you've been alone in this house half the time anyway. It's not like anyone is taking anything from you permanently. I stopped, slowly turned back, and looked at him. That was mistake number 3, because now he had said the quiet part out loud. Not permanently, I repeated. He nodded, trying to regain control. Exactly. Just temporary arrangement until things stabilize. I stared at him for a long second. Then I smiled, not warmly, not aggressively, just understanding. That's interesting, I said. Hannah frowned. What as I walked one step closer? Because every fraud case I ever investigated started with someone using the word temporary. The room went silent again. But this time, it was different. This silence had weight. I turned and started back up the stairs. Behind me, I heard Hannah whisper something to Richard, but I didn't catch the words. At the top of the stairs, I paused, then spoke without turning around. I need you to understand something, I said. My house is not a negotiation. And I walked into the living room, leaving them downstairs with their paperwork and their plan and their very first real problem. Me. The moment I stepped back into the living room, something inside me shifted from observer to builder. That's the best way I can describe it, because now I wasn't just reacting to what I saw, I was mapping it. Hannah Whitmore Cox came up the stairs first. Richard and Linda followed close behind, like they suddenly didn't want to be separated from their own narrative. I stayed near the coffee table. Same glass surface I had noticed earlier, still there, still wrong. Hannah tried to reset the tone immediately. Jensen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I held up a hand. No, I said quietly, there hasn't. That stopped her. Not because it was loud, because it was final. I gestured lightly around the room. Let's not pretend we're confused people. Confused people don't install new furniture inside someone else's house. Richard opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak yet. I turned slightly toward him. You brought documents into my basement. You redirected utilities. You created occupancy records. I looked at Hannah. And you did all of that while assuming I wouldn't return early enough to notice the difference. That part mattered, because timing is everything. Hannah exhaled sharply. It wasn't like that. I nodded slowly. Then explain it to me in a way that doesn't sound like that. Silence again. It always comes back to silence when logic runs out. Linda finally stepped forward, softer voice now. We were trying to help Daniel. He said he was under financial pressure. We didn't want him to lose the house. There it was again. Daniel. My son's name used like a shield. I sighed quietly. Where is Daniel? I asked again. This time Hannah answered faster. At work. He doesn't know we're here right now. That line hit differently. Not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. I nodded once. So let me summarize this correctly. I walked slowly toward the hallway, speaking as I moved. You moved into a property owned by me. Pause. You brought your parents into that property. Pause. You changed physical conditions inside that property. Pause. And you did all of this without the explicit presence or verified consent of the owner. I stopped and looked at them. Is that accurate? Richard shifted his weight. When you say it like that, I always say it like that, I interrupted calmly. That's when Hannah's patience cracked slightly. You make it sound criminal. I tilted my head. Interesting word choice, I said. I didn't use that word. She didn't respond, because she realized I didn't need to. I walked into the kitchen. Everything still felt slightly off, like the house was wearing someone else's habits. I opened the refrigerator. Different food, different brands, a full system of someone else's life stacked inside mine. I closed it slowly. You've been here 3 days, I said without turning around. Yes, Hannah said cautiously. And in 3 days I continued, "You've already replaced half the environment of a man who has lived here for over 20 years. Silence. That's when I decided something. I was done asking surface questions. I walked to the drawer near the sink. Open, closed, still mine. Inside I found what I was looking for, a small notebook, my old emergency log. I always kept it there. Habit from FEMA days. Hannah noticed it immediately. "What is that?" I didn't answer. I opened it. Blank pages, mostly. But I wasn't looking for writing. I was looking for confirmation. I closed it again and turned back to them. "You made one assumption," I said. Richard frowned. "What assumption?" I held up the notebook slightly. "That I don't track things." That line landed heavier than expected because it wasn't a threat. It was history. I walked back into the living room and sat down again. Slowly, deliberately. This time I didn't feel like a guest. I felt like an auditor. "Let's talk about Daniel," I said. Hannah stiffened slightly. I continued. "He didn't tell me about any arrangement." Richard quickly replied. He agreed to it. I raised a hand again. "No," I said. "He didn't." Then I leaned forward slightly. "And I know that because Daniel cannot handle paperwork decisions without calling me at least twice and asking if this is going to get him in trouble later." A faint silence followed. That was a crack, small but visible. Linda looked uncertain now. He said it was okay." I nodded. He might have said something like that, but okay and legally binding occupancy authorization are not the same thing. I stood up again, walked toward the window, looked outside. The black Ford Explorer was still there. Still wrong, still temporary looking. "You know what I used to see in FEMA cases?" I said casually. No one answered. People don't usually commit fraud with big, dramatic gestures. They do it with comfort language. I turned back, words like, "just for now," "just until things stabilize," "just while he's away." Hannah crossed her arms again, but this time it felt less confident. "You're making this sound worse than it is." I smiled slightly. "No," I said. "I'm making it accurate." Then I did something I hadn't done yet. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. Hannah reacted immediately. "What are you doing now?" I looked at her. "Continuing documentation." I opened the photo gallery. Scroll. Images from the basement, printed occupancy agreement, utility adjustments, signatures. "I have a question," I said calmly. I looked at Richard. "Who drafted this document?" He hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Hannah jumped in quickly. "It was just a template." I held up my phone. "Templates don't assign addresses," I said. Silence again. This time heavier. I stepped closer. "You didn't just stay here," I said quietly. "You attempted to formalize staying here." That word changed everything. Formalize. Because staying is accidental. Formalizing is intentional. And intention is where consequences begin. Hannah finally spoke again, but her voice was less controlled now. "We thought Daniel had authority to make those decisions." I nodded slowly. "There it is," I said. Richard frowned. "There what is?" "The weakest point in every system," I replied. I walked back to the couch, sat down again, and looked at them. "You didn't verify ownership authority." Pause. "You assumed verbal permission equals legal permission." Pause. "And you built actions on top of that assumption." I leaned back slightly. "That's not just a mistake," I said softly. "That's a structure." Silence again. But this one felt different, because now they were realizing something they hadn't considered before. This wasn't going to resolve itself with explanations. And I wasn't done yet, not even close. I looked at the hallway, down toward the basement stairs, and I said quietly, "There's something else you haven't shown me yet." Hannah's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" I smiled slightly. "The part where you explain all this to Daniel." And for the first time since I walked into my own house, I saw real uncertainty in her eyes. Because whatever plan they had built didn't include what happens when the missing piece comes home. There's a strange thing that happens when people realize they might have miscalculated you. They stop arguing the facts and start adjusting their tone. That's exactly what I saw in Hannah Whitmore Cox's face after I mentioned Daniel. Not fear yet, but recalibration. Richard Whitmore cleared his throat first. Jensen, we're not trying to create problems between you and your son. I nodded slowly. Good. Because you're already in the middle of one. That shut him up faster than anything else I'd said. I walked toward the kitchen counter and set my phone down deliberately. Screen facing up, not as a threat, just as a reminder that reality had a record now. Then I leaned against the counter, calm, controlled. You've all been talking a lot about what you thought was happening, I said. Now I want to talk about what I know is happening. Hannah crossed her arms tighter. And what exactly do you think is happening? I smiled slightly. That's the wrong question. She frowned. What do you mean I tapped the counter once? I don't think. I verify? Silence. That's when I decided to change the direction of the conversation entirely. Not escalate. Redirect. I'm going to ask something very simple, I said, and I want a simple answer. Richard nodded cautiously. Okay. Who physically changed the utility accounts? A pause. Linda glanced at Hannah. That was enough. I continued. Because utility changes don't happen by accident. They require identity verification, documentation, and authorization. Hannah spoke quickly. We didn't do anything illegal. We were just updating mailing addresses and contact information. I nodded. There it is again, I said quietly. What? She snapped. The language of minimization, I replied. I pushed off the counter and walked slowly toward the hallway again. You keep turning structural actions into administrative language. I stopped halfway. Let me translate for you, I said. Then I looked directly at her. Someone attempted to shift responsibility of a property they do not own. Silence again. But this time, Richard looked uncomfortable, because now the framing wasn't emotional. It was procedural. And people who rely on emotional justification always struggle when things become procedural. I turned back toward the living room. You know what I used to see in FEMA investigations, I said casually. No one answered. People would rebuild houses they didn't legally own yet, or file insurance claims on properties they were staying in temporarily. I nodded slightly to myself, and every single time it started the same way. Hannah narrowed her eyes. With what? With assumption? I said. I walked toward the couch again and sat down, slowly, intentionally. This is the part you missed, I continued. You didn't ask Daniel for permission in writing. You didn't verify ownership authority. You didn't consult a lawyer. I leaned forward. You assumed silence meant consent. That sentence hit differently. I could see it. Not anger, recognition, because she knew I was right. Richard tried to recover. We were just trying to help stabilize Daniel's situation. I held up a hand again. Stop, I said calmly. He stopped. I nodded. Let's talk about Daniel's situation, I said. I looked at Hannah. You said he was under financial pressure. She nodded quickly. Yes. And did Daniel tell you to move into my house? A pause. Then he said it would help reduce expenses. I leaned back slightly. Interesting. Not a denial, a reinterpretation. I exhaled slowly. Okay, I said. Then we're going to do something very simple. I stood up again, walked toward the hallway. And this time I didn't stop at the kitchen. I went straight to the front door, opened it. Cold Ohio air rushed in. All three of them followed me instinctively, because people always follow movement when they don't understand direction. I stepped outside onto the porch. The black Ford Explorer and white Honda Accord were still in the driveway. I pointed at them. Whose vehicles are those registered to? Richard answered quickly. Ours. And whose address is on the registration silence? That silence was different again, because now we were entering a space where assumptions couldn't survive. I turned slightly toward Hannah. I'll make this very clear. I said calmly. You don't accidentally register vehicles to a property you don't legally occupy. Her expression tightened. We were planning to formalize everything properly. That word again. Formalize. I nodded. That's the problem, I said quietly. You started with action and planned paperwork later. I looked back at the house. My house is not a draft document. Silence. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A normal suburban sound. Almost comforting if the moment wasn't so sharp. I stepped back inside. And this is where things shifted again. Because I didn't go back to arguing. I went quiet. Not emotionally quiet, strategically quiet. I walked to the hallway closet and opened it. Hannah followed. What are you doing? I didn't answer. Inside, I pulled out a small black case. Daniel recognized it once and joked it looked like Dad's spy kit. He wasn't entirely wrong. I placed it on the table, opened it. Inside a compact recorder, 2 small hidden cameras, and a portable backup drive. Hannah froze slightly. Richard frowned. What is that? I looked at them. Insurance, I said simply. Then I plugged the drive into my phone. Hannah stepped forward quickly. You've been recording us? I didn't look up yet. I record environments I don't fully trust, I said calmly. That was the truth, but not the whole truth. Because I had started recording before I even left for Chicago. Not because I expected this exact situation, but because Hannah had asked too many questions over the past months. Questions that didn't belong to casual curiosity, questions that belonged to preparation. And I never ignore preparation behavior. The file opened, audio logs, basement conversations, Hannah's voice, Richard's voice, Linda's voice, planning, discussing how long Jensen would be gone, discussing how to present occupancy. Hannah's voice clearly saying he won't check details. Older people don't look at paperwork closely. Silence hit the room like a dropped object. Hannah stepped back. No, she said quickly. That's not what we meant. I held up a hand. Don't interpret it, I said quietly. Just listen. Richard looked stunned now. Hannah, what is this? For the first time, she didn't answer immediately. And that delay told me everything. I looked at them, calm, controlled, and said the next line very softly. I think we should wait for Daniel, because now the structure they built had to stand in front of its missing pillar. And I already knew one thing for certain. Whatever they told him was about to collapse under its own timing. The house changed temperature after I said Daniel's name. Not literally, but you know what I mean. People always think pressure comes from shouting. It doesn't. It comes from waiting. Hannah Whitmore Cox stopped moving completely. Richard Whitmore looked like he was trying to mentally rewrite the last 30 seconds. Linda? She just stared at the table like it might offer her a different version of reality. I didn't rush them. That's another lesson from FEMA work. When people are cornered by their own documentation, silence does more work than interrogation. I picked up the recorder case and closed it slowly. Let's make something clear, I said. No one interrupted. Good. That audio you just heard isn't the problem. I continued. It's the confirmation. Hannah finally spoke, but her voice had lost its earlier structure. You recorded private conversations. I nodded. Yes. Richard blinked. Is that even legal? I looked at him directly. In my own house, I asked, where the conversations were about occupying my property. Pause. Yes? That answer didn't comfort him. It just removed his last argument. I walked back toward the kitchen table and opened the laptop from the basement folder. The screen lit up immediately. Files were already there, organized, labeled. Someone had taken care to build a timeline, and that told me something important. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Hannah stepped forward again, slower this time. Jensen, we weren't trying to take anything permanently. I didn't look up immediately. I clicked through files. Temporary occupancy draft, utility redirection request, mailing address update, Vehicle registration intent? Then I stopped and looked at her. You've been building administrative presence for at least 10 days, I said calmly. Richard shook his head. That's not what happened. I tilted the laptop slightly so he could see. Then explain this, I said. A scanned email thread. Hannah to Richard. If we can establish residency before he returns, it becomes harder to challenge. Silence again. This one was heavier, because now it wasn't interpretation, it was written intent. Linda whispered almost to herself, "Oh my God." Hannah turned sharply. "That's not what I meant." I raised a hand. "Stop," I said again, not angry, just final. She stopped. I closed the laptop slowly, then leaned back. "You know what the mistake is here?" I asked quietly. No one answered, so I did. "You assumed process is something you can complete after action." I stood up, walked toward the front door again, and opened it. Cold air again. Same driveway, same 2 cars, same house, but everything inside it had changed. I pointed at the driveway. "Let's talk about something practical," I said. Richard frowned. "What now, vehicles?" I said. Hannah stiffened slightly. I continued. "You don't register vehicles to a residence you don't legally occupy unless you are attempting to establish proof of residency." Silence. I turned to her. "And that requires intent?" Her voice cracked slightly. "We were going to tell Daniel everything before finalizing." I nodded. "That's the part you don't understand," I said. "You don't get to finalize first and explain later." I stepped back inside and closed the door. The sound echoed a little louder than normal. Now I was standing in the center of the living room again, but this time the dynamic had shifted. They weren't arguing anymore. They were reacting, and reaction is always slower than preparation. I looked at the clock on the wall. 5:42 p.m. Daniel's shift usually ended around 6 o'clock. I turned back to them. "He'll be here soon," I said calmly. Hannah swallowed. "You called him?" I shook my head. "No." Richard frowned. "Then how he always comes by on Thursdays," I said simply. A pause. Habit. That word landed harder than expected. Because habits are uncontrollable variables, and uncontrollable variables ruin plans. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Slow, deliberate. "Let's reset the conversation," I said. I leaned against the counter again. "You thought I was gone long enough to establish presence." I took a sip. "You were wrong." Hannah's voice rose slightly. "We weren't trying to hurt anyone." I looked at her. "I believe you," I said. That surprised her. But I wasn't finished. "But intent doesn't erase action." Silence. Richard ran a hand through his hair. "So what happens now?" I paused. That was the real question. Not what happened. What comes next? I set the glass down. "Now," I said, "we wait." Hannah shook her head slightly. Wait for what? I looked at her directly. For Daniel to see his own house. That sentence changed the room again. Because now it wasn't just about me. It was about him. And that's when I heard it. A car door outside, followed by footsteps on the driveway. 3 seconds later, the front door opened. Dad Daniel Cox stood in the doorway, still in his work uniform, still holding his phone, still completely unaware of what he was about to walk into. He looked at me first, then past me, and saw them. Hannah, her parents, the documents, the laptop, the silence, and slowly, his face changed, not to anger, not yet, to confusion that was trying very hard not to become understanding. "Okay," Daniel said slowly, "what is going on here?" I took one step back and said quietly that I replied is exactly what I was waiting for. There's a very specific kind of silence that only exists when someone walks into a situation that has already been decided without them. Daniel Cox stood in my doorway like the air itself had forgotten to give him instructions. He still had his work badge clipped to his belt. His eyes moved from me to Hannah, to her parents, then to the laptop on the kitchen table, And just like that, his entire evening stopped being normal. "Okay," he said again, slower this time. "Someone needs to explain what I'm looking at." No one spoke. That's the thing about moments like this. Whoever speaks first usually loses control of the narrative. I stayed quiet. Hannah tried first. "Daniel, it's not what it looks like." Daniel raised a hand slightly, not angry, not yet. Confused people don't jump to anger immediately. They try to stabilize reality first. "What does it look like?" he asked. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. Linda whispered, "We can explain." Daniel turned toward her. "Please do." Hannah stepped forward quickly, now urgency leaking through her control. "We were only staying here temporarily." "Your father said it would be fine," I interrupted calmly. "No," I said. All eyes shifted to me. "I didn't say that." Hannah turned toward me sharply. "You implied I didn't imply that either?" I said. A pause. Daniel looked between us. "Dad, what's she talking about?" I exhaled slowly. This was the moment where most people try to explain everything at once. That's a mistake. When everything is emotional, explanation becomes noise. So I chose structure. "I was away in Chicago," I said. "They moved into the house while I was gone." Daniel blinked. "Moved in, yes," I said. Hannah immediately tried to recover. "It was just temporary arrangement while you were under financial pressure." Daniel cut her off. "My financial pressure," he repeated. Now his voice had changed, not louder, sharper. I watched his face carefully. That shift mattered. Hannah hesitated. "You told us you were struggling with expenses." Daniel slowly shook his head. "I told you I was budgeting tighter this month," he said. "That's not the same thing as needing someone to take over my father's house." Silence. That's when Richard stepped in, trying to stabilize the situation. "We thought we were helping stabilize the household situation," he said carefully. Daniel looked at him. "You moved into my father's house without telling him." Richard hesitated. That hesitation answered everything. Daniel turned to Hannah again. "Did you know about this?" Hannah swallowed. It made sense at the time." Daniel laughed once. Not humor, disbelief. Made sense to who no one answered. I watched him carefully now, because this was the pivot point. Not anger, not resolution. Understanding turning into damage assessment. Daniel walked further into the house, slowly, like he was remeasuring reality with every step. He stopped near the coffee table, looked at the laptop, then at the printed documents, then at me. "Dad?" he said quietly. "What did they do?" I didn't answer immediately, because I needed him to see it himself first. Hannah rushed again. "We didn't take anything. We just organized things so it wouldn't sit empty." Daniel turned toward her, and this time his voice changed completely. "You organized my father's house." The way he said it made Hannah step back slightly. Not fear, realization. Daniel continued. "You changed furniture, you changed accounts, you created paperwork." Richard tried again. "It wasn't meant to be permanent." Daniel cut him off again. "That word again," he said sharply. He turned to me briefly. "Dad." "How long has this been going on?" I answered honestly. 3 days since I came back," I said. "But planning started before that." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, just 1 second, then opened them again, and I saw it. The moment responsibility shifted inside him, not toward them, toward himself, because he understood something I didn't need to say out loud. This didn't happen without his involvement being assumed, even if he didn't authorize it. His name had been used. His silence had been interpreted. That's the part that always hurts the most in these situations. Not betrayal, misrepresentation. Daniel finally spoke again. "I never gave permission for any of this." Hannah stepped forward quickly. "We thought you did verbally?" Daniel shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "I didn't." Silence again. Longer this time. He looked at the documents on the table, then at me, then back at them, and his voice dropped. "So what exactly were you planning to do here?" That question hit differently, because now it wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about intent. Richard answered carefully. We were trying to establish a temporary living arrangement until things stabilized financially. Daniel laughed again, but this time it was bitter. You keep saying stabilize, he said, but what does that even mean? No one answered. Daniel walked toward the basement door. I didn't stop him. He opened it, looked down, then came back up slowly. You put my name on utility changes, he said. Hannah froze. Daniel continued. You used my information without telling me, Linda whispered. We thought it was okay. Daniel turned toward her. You thought, he repeated. Then silence. Heavy silence. The kind that presses down on a room until people start avoiding eye contact. Daniel stepped back into the center of the living room, and then he looked at me. Dad, he said quietly, what happens now? That was the real question. Not what happened, not who did what now. I walked slowly toward him and placed a hand on the table, calm, controlled. This stops, I said simply. Hannah immediately reacted. We can fix it. I shook my head. No, I said. Then I looked at Daniel. This doesn't get fixed. It gets reversed. Silence. Richard looked confused. Reversed, I nodded. Yes, I said. Everything that was changed gets undone. Legally, structurally, documented. Daniel rubbed his forehead. This is insane, he muttered. I looked at him. No, I said calmly. This is paperwork. That got a strange reaction from him, a half laugh that didn't fully form, but I wasn't joking. I continued. And we're going to make one thing very clear, I said. I turned toward Hannah and her parents. You don't enter someone's property and then decide how it should function? Hannah's voice cracked slightly. We were trying to help Daniel. Daniel cut her off this time. No, he said firmly. You were trying to solve a problem that wasn't yours to solve. That sentence landed harder than anything I had said all day, because it came from him, not me. Silence filled the room again, but this silence was different. This one had resolution forming inside it. Daniel exhaled slowly. I need you all to leave, he said. Hannah blinked. What? Daniel didn't raise his voice. I said leave. Richard stepped forward. Daniel, we can talk? Daniel shook his head. No more talking, he said. Not today. He pointed toward the door. Now. No one moved immediately. So I added quietly, it's the safest option. That's when they understood. Slowly, one by one, they gathered their things. No shouting, no chaos. Just quiet realization that the situation had shifted beyond their control. Hannah looked at me one last time before leaving. Not anger, not apology, something more complicated. Then she walked out. Richard and Linda followed. The door closed behind them, and the house finally became quiet again. But it wasn't peaceful. Not yet. Daniel stood there for a long time. Then he said softly, I didn't know. I nodded. I know, I said. And for the first time that night, there was no more arguing left, only what comes after. After they left, the house didn't immediately feel like mine again. That's something people don't tell you about situations like this. Removing people is easy. Removing their presence is not. Daniel Cox stood in the middle of the living room like he was trying to figure out where the floor had gone slightly uneven. He kept looking at the couch, the kitchen, the hallway, like he was checking if reality would admit to a mistake. Finally, he spoke. I didn't authorize any of this, he said again, quieter now. I nodded. I know. He shook his head slowly. Dad, I swear I didn't know they were doing this. I believe you, I said. And I did. That's the part people usually find surprising. In situations like this, I wasn't angry at Daniel. Anger requires intent. What I felt was something else. Awareness. He ran a hand through his hair. They said it was just temporary, that you were okay with it. I leaned back slightly against the counter. That phrase again, I said quietly. Daniel looked at me. What phrase, temporary? He exhaled sharply. It sounds so harmless when they say it like that. I nodded once. That's why it works. A long silence followed. The kind where you can hear the refrigerator humming too loudly like it's trying to participate in the conversation. Daniel finally sat down on the edge of the couch. Slowly, like his body didn't fully trust the furniture anymore. "So what happens now?" he asked again. This time I answered differently. Now I said we clean it up. He looked up at me. "Clean it up?" "Yes," I said. "Not emotionally. Structurally." That made him pause. Because Daniel understood work, logistics, systems, order. That language made sense to him. I walked to the kitchen table and opened my folder again. The same documents, the same timeline, the same quiet evidence of decisions made without authority. "I've already contacted someone," I said. Daniel frowned. "Who?" "A property attorney I worked with years ago," I said. "And I also called a friend in Columbus PD, non-emergency liaison." He straightened slightly. "You called the police?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "I asked questions." "There's a difference." Daniel looked down at his hands. "Is this legal trouble for them?" I hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly. "It depends on how far they pushed it," I said. "But intent is already documented." That word again. Documented. Daniel leaned forward. "Dad, what did they actually do?" I closed the folder slowly. And for the first time that night, I didn't answer like an investigator. I answered like a father. "They tried to turn my home into something you didn't recognize," I said quietly. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded once. "I don't want that," he said. "I know," I replied. Another silence. But this one was different. Less sharp, more exhausted. Daniel stood up again and walked toward the window. The driveway was empty now except for my Ford Escape. The two other cars were gone. The absence felt louder than their presence. "I should have noticed something," Daniel said. I shook my head. "No," I said. "You should have been told." That made him look back at me. "I trusted them," he said. I nodded slowly. "That's not a crime," I said. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Feels like one tonight." I didn't argue, because I understood what he meant. He turned back toward me. "Are you going to press charges?" he asked. That question hung in the air longer than the others. I took a slow breath. "I'm going to document everything properly," I said. "After that, we'll see." Daniel nodded slowly. "And Hannah," I paused. That was the hardest part, because nothing about her was purely malicious. That's what makes situations like this messy. She made decisions, I said carefully, but she also believed she was solving a problem. Daniel frowned. "That doesn't excuse it." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." Another silence. Then he said something softer. "This is going to change everything, isn't it?" I looked at him. "Yes," I said simply. He sat back down. Like that answer finally weighed more than everything else combined. Hours passed after that in smaller fragments. We checked documents again. We made notes. We called Daniel's lawyer friend to clarify exposure. The house slowly returned to its original state, but not emotionally. Not yet. At one point, Daniel picked up one of the fake occupancy papers and just stared at it. "They really thought this would work," he said. I nodded. "People don't build plans they think will fail," I said. "They build plans they think won't be questioned." That stayed with him. Later that night, after the calls and paperwork and long stretches of exhausted silence, Daniel stood near the door again. "I should have protected this better," he said quietly. I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't lose the house," I said. "You just learned who tried to redefine it." He nodded slowly, but I could see it. The emotional cost had already been paid, not in money, in trust. And trust is not something you rebuild overnight. Before he left that night, he looked back at me one more time. "You okay?" he asked. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was ironic. "I've been through worse than paperwork wars in my own living room," I said. That got a small smile out of him. Then he left, and I was alone again. The house was quiet now, properly quiet. No footsteps upstairs, no rearranged furniture, no unfamiliar keys on my table. Just silence. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time, looking at everything, slowly restoring mental order to physical space. But I didn't feel victorious. That's important. People think moments like this end with satisfaction. They don't. They end with understanding. I walked to the window and looked out at the empty driveway. And I thought about something I learned a long time ago in FEMA work. When people try to take something that isn't theirs, they rarely see themselves as thieves. They see themselves as organizers, fixers, helpers. That's what makes it dangerous, because intention and impact don't always match. I sat down finally, not tired, just still. And I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't a story that ended tonight. It was a story that changed direction tonight. And sometimes that's worse, because direction has consequences that last longer than the moment that created them. The house was quiet in a way I hadn't felt in days. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The everything has been rearranged, and now we're pretending it never happened kind. I woke up early the next morning without really sleeping. That happens more often when your mind is still organizing events your body hasn't accepted yet. Columbus light came through the kitchen window, soft gray, the kind that makes everything look honest, whether it wants to be or not. Daniel had left late the night before. No dramatic exit, no shouting, just a tired man trying to hold his life together with both hands. And me, I was left with the house again, technically mine, but not untouched. That matters. I walked through each room slowly. The living room first. The couch was still slightly shifted from where it used to sit. I pushed it back an inch, then stopped, realizing how absurd that felt. Like furniture alignment could fix what had happened here. The kitchen next. Empty cups still in the sink. I washed them without thinking. One plate, one mug, one spoon. Small things. But small things are where life rebuilds itself. Then the basement. I stood at the top of the stairs longer than I expected. That room still carried the echo of folders, documents, voices trying to justify themselves. I went down anyway. Everything was still there in memory more than in space. The tables were now mostly cleared, files packed into my black case, evidence preserved, not displayed. I touched the edge of the table, not because I needed to, because my body needed confirmation that it was over, or at least paused. I stayed down there for a while, thinking, not about revenge, not about winning, about how quickly a home can become something else when people assume silence means permission. When I came back upstairs, I noticed something on the counter, a note. Daniel's handwriting, short, uneven. I'll figure things out. I just need time. That was it. No explanation, no apology attempt wrapped in excuses, just time. I sat down at the kitchen table and read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it beside my coffee mug. Because sometimes that's all you can do with words like that, not respond. Just place them somewhere and let them exist. Around noon, Tom Reynolds called. "You still alive?" he asked immediately. Unfortunately, I replied. He laughed. So it went well. I looked around the kitchen. That word well felt too clean for what had happened. It went, I said. Tom understood that tone. "You want me to come down there?" he asked. "No," I said. "I think I'm done collecting witnesses." That made him quiet for a second. Then he said, softer, "Family complicated," I answered. "Yeah," he said. "That's usually the worst kind of case." We didn't talk much after that because there wasn't much to say. After the call, I went outside. The driveway was empty again. No unfamiliar cars, just the sound of a neighbor mowing their lawn 2 houses down. Normal life continuing like nothing had been rewritten inside mine. That's the strange part. Everything can feel like a disaster inside your home, while the outside world remains completely uninterested. I stood there for a while, hands in my jacket pockets, thinking about Hannah Whitmore Cox, about Richard and Linda, about how confident they had been in their temporary arrangement. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me a little. What remained wasn't anger, it was clarity. People don't always act out of cruelty. Sometimes they act out of certainty without verification. And certainty without verification is just another word for assumption. Assumption is what built this entire situation. Not hatred, not evil, just assumption. Later that afternoon, Daniel came back. He didn't knock this time. Just walked in like someone who still wasn't sure if he was allowed to. He looked exhausted. More than yesterday. He sat down at the table and didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said they called me. I nodded. I figured they would. They said you set them up, he added quietly. I didn't react immediately, because I expected that too. That's how people protect themselves after consequences arrive, I said. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I don't know what to believe anymore. I looked at him. You don't need to believe everything I said. You just need to verify what belongs where. That made him look up. He gave a short, tired laugh. You sound like you're still working. I shrugged slightly. Old habits don't retire. Another pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. I feel like I failed you. I shook my head immediately. No. I said, you didn't. He frowned. Then what did I do? I leaned back slightly. You trusted people who spoke confidently, I said. That's not failure. That's being human. He looked down at the table. I should have seen it, he said again. I answered gently. Or they should have stopped before it reached your front door. That silence lasted longer than the others. Eventually he stood up again. I'm going to fix this with them, he said. I looked at him carefully. No, I said. He paused. No. I shook my head. You're going to fix your life, I corrected. They are responsible for fixing their choices. He didn't argue. That told me he understood. Before leaving again, he stopped at the doorway. Dad, he said. I looked up. Thanks for handling it. I gave a small nod. I didn't handle it, I said. I just didn't ignore it. He smiled faintly, then left. And then it was just me again, but different. Not because the house changed, because my understanding of it did. That night I sat alone in the living room, the same couch, the same walls, but now I could see something I couldn't before. Not damage, pattern. People often think life breaks suddenly. It doesn't. It shifts slowly when no one is paying attention to the right details. I looked around my house and said quietly, almost to myself, you don't lose your home in one moment. You lose it in small permissions you never agreed to. Then I leaned back and let the silence stay, not as an ending, but as a reminder, because the truth is, this house was never taken from me. It was tested, and now I knew exactly where the weak points were, and more importantly, who I could trust not to test them again. What I learned from all of this is something I didn't expect to feel at my age. People don't always cross lines because they are evil. Sometimes they cross lines because no one ever stopped them the first time they got close. And if I'm honest with you, the hardest part wasn't removing them from my house. It was realizing how easily help can turn into replacement when boundaries aren't clearly defended. You don't fix that with anger. You fix it with clarity, with documentation, with calm decisions made before emotion takes over. And sometimes you don't get a clean ending. You just get a quieter house and a more honest understanding of who people are. That's what I got, not peace, but truth. And truth is what you build the next version of your life on. If this story meant something to you, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. Drop a comment below and tell us, have you ever been in a situation like this? We read every single one. And as always, thank you for being a part of this.